My work is about language that we participate in through the way that we interact with objects. And in this respect, I have decided at some point that I will select and arrange objects and find ways to present them. That's basically the concept of my work, and that's basically the philosophy of my practice. The museum did not exist in the 1500s. There were no museums. Museums were evolved in the 19th century as institutions that would make works of art accessible to general public. Then the question is, how do you present the art to the public? And art history is a discipline of study and research about art and culture and history that has its priorities philosophically and practically in terms of how to present these objects. Presenting the objects has to do with ideas about learning, experiencing, and appreciating. So the museum is structured in a way that defines different works in different categories. And the categories could be in time, a room that's an earlier period, a middle period, and a contemporary period. What I do has to do with a different way of experiencing things and associating things. So it's really more about how we perceive things, how we organize them in our own way, because we mix things up. You can go to the museum, but we mix the impressions. That we are very impressed with a Roman period work, and we leave the museum remembering that in relationship to a contemporary work of art that also impressed us. So we don't necessarily remember things in the chronological history that the museum is organized. We remake the arrangement, and then sometimes we write about it, sometimes we just get inspired, sometimes it shows up in our dream. This is what interests me. And so in a sense, that's the area in which I also work. Therefore, the idea is to reconfigure arrangements of objects in a way that is more fluid, to move from one thing to the other and try to understand how that can construct meaning also. When things become fixed for too long, they're always reproduced in the history in the same place in the book, with the same group of objects. They're always in the museum in the same place with the same group of objects. We are taught about their history in the same way. Our ideas are formed in relation to how we were presented with these works. But when you take these works out of this context and you put them in another context, that can open up a space for imagination in a way that will allow for new ideas to come. Things get rigidified after time, and structure is good to build on, but structure can also become a prison at a certain point. And the big question is how to let things open up, to allow for a growth of imagination and the surfacing of new ideas.
And in the exhibition you mix art objects with everyday objects, and one of them is those salt and pepper shakers that you have collected from the people who work at the museum. Was it important that it was people working here who gave you the shakers?
Yes, it was important because in a way it is more interesting to invite people in the museum who are there all the time to participate in the conversation. And one way of participating in the conversation is to come to the dinner table, right? And sit with everybody and have a discussion. Well, another way is to bring an object to the museum that's your object. Of course, I asked for a specific object, so in a way I'm also organized the category of object. So in this case I said, let's just make it simple. Something that everybody has, something that everybody doesn't take too seriously. And at the same time, it's very important and serious. It's at a very important place, the dinner table, the kitchen table, where we keep coming. And what happens when we eat at the kitchen table? Sometimes we get distracted and suddenly we look at the salt and pepper shakers. And I say, oh, I never saw it has this kind of shape. Or this is interesting to me, the way there are these markings in our immediate place of work and life and living that are there, but that we kind of take for granted until that moment when we suddenly get distracted and find it again. The audience is part of the work. The audience completes the experience. The audience is participating, and the work is there to engage the audience. That's why we designate special places for this kind of performance. Just as we have a theater and the audience comes and sees the play, we have a museum, the audience comes and sees the objects. The display is in fact a way of presenting things. The museum displays things, the store displays things in the window. But the concept of display in this situation has to do with allowing for an awareness of how display is displayed, how display works. The fact that it is a form of communication that is in many different categories of everyday life.
Can I ask you where your fascination with the everyday life and objects stems from?
From everyday life and objects. What is everyday life? And what is not everyday life? I think being alive is everyday life. I think that it's interesting to think about how we think about art and how we have learned to experience art. In the Middle Ages, you didn't know who the artists were very often because it was a community interactive activity in which people who had different talents contributed something to the construction of the cathedral in the town. And we don't always know who the architects were, or we don't always know the idea of the architect or the artist as being the center was not the issue. God was the center. And So it was about a community interacting. And everyday life is about community interacting, of doing things together, of helping each other, or of contributing something. But in that sense, I like the idea of everyday interacting in terms of objects contributing to objects. And so they don't have to be in a hierarchy of categories necessarily. There are other ways they can talk to each other. And so the idea of the everyday actually returns to the experience of things as they come, and the democracy of freedom of choice to put things together as you do. And if you're very good at it, and if you have something to say, and if you have a community that wants to support that, then maybe they invite you to do a show at the museum and they say, well, why don't you show us how you do it?